After listening to Pastor Rich's message last night, I was literally having the thought, okay, what's left to talk about? Because sometimes you need just to remember the things that are most pure and most central to who we are as followers of Jesus. And I live in LA, and my wife, Kim, is a country girl, and she grew up on a farm. I mean, a real farm with like animals and crops, tobacco, but crops still. And she took me to this little space where the water came out of the ground and they drank it, which I thought was really dangerous. And when we got married, we always kind of like negotiated where we'd live. She wanted to live in the country. I wanted to live in the city. So we live in the city. That's how we negotiated it. And she's always asking me, are we always going to live in the city? And I said, well, we don't really live in the city. And she goes, well, that means yes, if you don't think we live in the city. We can see the Hollywood sign from our house, basically. And so I wanted to give her a gift. So about a month ago, I took her on a treat. I took her on a series of little excavations and trips. And so we went up to Northern California because we met this couple, Terces and Matthew, and they own a series of vegan restaurants in LA. I don't know why you're wooing, but personally, I have a hard time eating vegetables and fruit because they don't have the opportunity to run for their lives. And I feel like it's cruel and unusual, but went out to their farm and it was an amazing experience because their farm is an organic experience. It's not like any farm I'd ever seen where everything is lined up and there's orange trees all lined up or I'm out of vegetables and whatever else, broccoli lined up or apples lined up. And you ever seen those farms where everything just perfectly lined up? I thought that's the way farms are supposed to happen, but their farm looked like it was out of control. It was wild, and there was just one tree, then another tree, then a different tree, then something else. And Matthew was walking me around, explaining to me how this is the way that nature was actually intended to be. That only humans line everything up and standardize it. Only humans think conformity is the better way to make things grow. That naturally, in creation, the way God has done it, and he said, underneath this ground is the most complex internet in the universe. I was like, ooh, this is exciting. And I'm standing on it, on the internet. And he said, these trees are communicating with each other, and they're giving to each other the minerals and nutrients they need. And when you put everything the same, they only have the same to give, so they can't give each other what they actually need. And we're walking around, and I'm just thinking about all the implications about why the church has been so standardized and why we use the word discipleship, but actually we just mean conformity, and why the moment someone looks unique, we think they're not looking like Jesus. And it just struck me how we tend to move things towards standardization and conformity, but God always moves things to complexity, and it's organic and beautiful and unexpected. And then as we're walking around, they had sheep, which kind of surprised me because I knew they were vegans. They have these places called Gracias Madre and Cafe Gratitude, and they're just these great restaurants. And I always love going there and then getting something to eat afterwards. And I get my salad there. And I said, but you have sheep? And he goes, yes. And he explained to me why they have sheep. And this is a person who's been a vegan all of his life, and now he's become a meat eater in the last 3 years. And he explained to me that in creation, that herding animals graze and then defecate. And if they didn't get forced to move, they would graze where they defecate, and it would actually corrupt the food and the system. And he said that's why predators are important, because predators force herds to move. And then herds graze and actually replenish the soil with their waste. And then he went on to explain to me, because in creation, nothing's wasted. And that just hit me. In nature, nothing's wasted. And then from there, my wife and I went up to Carmel to this conference called EG. It's sort of a more bohemian expression of TED. And I've been a part of TED for like 10, 15 years. And I love listening to the brightest minds in the world from every arena, every discipline. And that's sort of like my place to just sort of enjoy. But I went to EG for the first time, and it was all these hippie geniuses somehow making money. And then one of them was this photographer who followed orangutans. And if you know anything about orangutans, and I'm sure all of you do, they kind of come from the Indonesian, Malaysian part of the world, but they're almost now only found in jungles of Sumatra and Borneo. And so this photographer was following this orangutan, and she had it on film. It was so amazing. And this orangutan went out on this log over a river, and they just laid down the log and died. And they were able to film the death, a natural death of an orangutan. And they said, we didn't want it to fall into the river, so we just pulled the orangutan off the log and we laid it down on the ground. And then they took photographs, and they said we came back 2 weeks later, and when they came back, there was nothing but bone. They said, you see, this orangutan became the food for all the insects. And then the photographer said, because in nature, nothing's wasted. And there it was again. In nature, nothing's wasted. And of course, my mind started reeling and thinking, well, if in nature nothing's wasted, this must be God's design. That when God creates, he creates something with such powerful interconnection in such an organic and beautiful way that there's nothing wasted. Then I started thinking about plastic and how we created plastic. And plastic is something that we invented that does not naturally reconnect itself to creation and the creative process, and so it just creates permanent waste. And I started thinking about us. And I wonder how many of us have chosen to become plastic because we're afraid to be fertilizer. And so I started looking at our lives and wondering if the way that God works in our lives is that when we reconnect to him, we reconnect not only to the creator, but to the creative process. And when you're a part of the creative process, nothing's wasted. So I want you to look with me in the book of Acts chapter 7, and I want us to look at this moment when Stephen is preaching his only message. By the way, that's kind of tragic. One of the few messages we actually have a record of is by someone who only preached one time. Imagine if your first sermon had to be your best one. And then you think, what a tragedy. This man, Stephen, with this kind of gifting and talent, died after his first message. What a waste. Or maybe not. So in Acts chapter 7, beginning in verse 20, he starts talking about Moses. And he says this about Moses. At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. When Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. The next day, Moses came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of the burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. And as he went over to get a closer look, he heard the Lord say, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. This is the same Moses they had rejected with the words, who made you ruler and judge over us? He was sent to be their ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He led them out of Egypt and performed wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea for 40 years in the wilderness. This is the Moses who told the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your own people. That opening imagery from Stephen when he says, at that time Moses was born and he was no ordinary child. I don't want to just move on there, because when he uses the phrase at that time, he's telling us it was the worst time. He understands that all the people listening, those Hebrews who knew the history of Moses, knew that at that time was the worst time. Have you ever felt like you were born at the wrong time or the wrong place or to the wrong family or to the wrong color, to the wrong ethnicity or the wrong economic condition? Have you ever felt like you started life at a deficit? You know, Moses started his life at that time. Because at that time, Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt, had forgotten Joseph, and so he decided to wipe out the Hebrews who lived in Egypt in cooperation, in community with them. And God blessed both the Hebrews and the Egyptians, and we seem to forget that. God was never against the Egyptians. He blessed the Egyptians through the Hebrews. But this Pharaoh forgot that, and he did not want them to be the conduit of God's blessing for them. So he begins to oppress them, turn them into slaves, and that wasn't enough, so he decided to kill all the firstborn sons of the Hebrews, and Moses was born in that generation where every one of his peers was murdered. Can you imagine being the living symbol of God not showing up for your kid? Because we look at Moses as a symbol of God's promise, a symbol of God's goodness, a symbol of God's protection. But the reality is that Moses grew up, and every single Hebrew family who saw Moses was reminded that their son was not spared. You see, it was at that time when Moses was born. And then it says that he was no ordinary child, which I don't want to leave behind, because I don't think when Moses was born, he looked that extraordinary. I think he looked regular. And I know Rich and DC just had a little baby, and Rich is all in love and everything like that. But I've been around babies. I've had a couple. One of them is right here. Her name is Mariah. And I'm just telling you, baby horses, when they're born, those calves are beautiful. Baby dogs, when they're born, they're called puppies. They're beautiful. Even cats that I despise, when they're born, they're called kittens because they're beautiful. Elephants, when they're born, they come out entire miniature elephant. Boom. Just walking, doing life. Humans, when we're born, we're hideous. We're just one giant head and an appendage. And the only reason your mother thought you were beautiful is she had just gone through the trauma of labor. And when Kim said, "Oh, isn't he beautiful?" I'm like, have you ever seen all the projected imagery of like aliens? If you take a human baby and keep a human baby the same, it looks like an alien. Mariah was beautiful when she was born. But dads know they have to say that, because they just sent their wives through the most pain that they've ever been through. See, the reason Stephen says when Moses was born, he was an ordinary child, it's not because he looked so extraordinary when he was born. He's looking back through his life. And the only way he can describe anyone who lived the life Moses lived was calling him no ordinary child. See, and I'm convinced that this is true for all of you. There has never been an ordinary human being born on this planet. But the tragedy, the perplexing thing is that if there has never been an ordinary human being born, how do we explain how many of us die having lived tragically ordinary lives? But that's not even what I want to talk to you about. I just thought we'd start there just to lay a foundation. It says, for 3 months, he was cared for by his family. And when he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him in and brought him up as her own son. He just described so briefly one of the most traumatic events a human being could ever go through. Moses only lived under the protection of his parents for 3 months. And then, because of this Holocaust, they had to put Moses in a basket in a river, hoping he could survive that, because they knew there was a better chance for him to survive in a river where he could drown or be eaten than in their own home. And so at 3 months, Moses was put outside, and he floats down the river, and if life could get worse, he floats right to the house of Pharaoh and Pharaoh's daughter, and she finds him, and she decides to make him her son. Now imagine growing up all your life as now the adopted son of the very man who wanted you dead. Imagine growing up as the son, receiving the inheritance, living in the comfort of the man who killed every one of your peers, where every single day of your life you were reminded that you're living under the benefit of the curse that everyone else experienced. Imagine being Pharaoh's daughter, and then she hires your actual mother to take care of you as your nanny, and you thought you had family issues. You know, I'm an immigrant from El Salvador, and I was born in San Salvador, and Spanish was awesome. And, Spanish was my first language, and I never knew my father. I know about my father. I know he spoke around 12 languages, and that he was a linguistic savant and an alcoholic and a violent man. I know that when my mom was pregnant with me, he threw her down a flight of stairs trying to cause an abortion and broke her leg. I know that the day I was born, my mom left me with my grandparents because she was barely 20 years old and got a job with Pan Am and took off to San Francisco and began to try to make a life so we could have a future. I know when I was around 4 or 5 years old, my mom took us from El Salvador to the United States, and I didn't know who I was and who I belonged to. See, I think there's a lot of you here who are like Moses because you were put outside. This phrase to me is so significant, verse 21, when he was placed outside. See, there's some of you here, you feel like you've been placed outside. And you carry so many wounds and so many scars, and you're just so broken. But I want you to know with God, there's nothing wasted. And so every wound you carry, every scar you bear, every experience that has stayed with you like a nightmare, but it's just a memory. See, there's some of you here, you feel so damaged. You're like, I wish I could be more. I wish that I could have more courage. I wish I could be healthier. I wish I could have more faith. I wish I could be more like the people that I admire, but I'm just so broken inside. But I want you to know that with God, you see, there's nothing wasted. When you try to fix all this without God, all the brokenness just keeps shaking inside of your soul. And you keep hearing the rattling of all the fragmentation of your identity. See, I look back and I go, God, why would you do this to me? I mean, I was 12 years old in a psychiatric chair. I was an overachiever in psychosis. I remember looking at ink blots at the age of 12, being asked, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see? And spending months in and out of a hospital because they thought I was irreparable. I couldn't be fixed. And I look back and think, God, couldn't you have just left me a little less damaged? Because I always feel like I'm running behind. You feel like you're just in last place, but you're running really hard, and everyone else doesn't seem like they're running as hard, but they're in first place. See, I'm going, God, the reason I can't run as fast is I have to keep going back and picking up a part of me. I have to keep going back and grabbing a part of my soul. I just keep losing a limb. I have to go back and grab me so I can keep going forward. But I want you to know something. This is something I've learned. See, I could have never known that God allowed this to happen in my life, that God allowed me to be placed outside because God loves the outsider. And if the only people who ever find his grace and his mercy and his kindness are the people who've always been the inside, who will ever understand the soul of the outsider? People ask me, well, what's the difference between Mosaic? And on Hollywood Boulevard, said really the difference is that Mosaic is a place where we never forget what it's like to be on the outside looking in. We just never got comfortable on the inside. And Moses was being prepared. The journey he had to be on was from the outside because he was going to lead an entire people who lived in their entire lives on the outside. They were slaves. They were oppressed. They were despised. And God was going to call them out of Egypt. But here's the problem is that when God moves them to freedom, they were still carrying their captivity with them. See, there's some of you, you've traveled a long way, but you've carried your captivity with you. And I want you to know, stop being upset or angry, or stop thinking you're in a deficit because of all your wounds and scars. Because with God, there's nothing wasted. So you look at all those scars, you take all those wounds. People ask me, how do you have insight into people? I just look inside and see all the brokenness, and I recognize the rest of the world. You can see everyone through your own wounds if you'll take the time. It goes on to say, in verse 22, when Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. I look at this and I go, what a waste. He was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and powerful in speech and action, but he wasn't gonna grow up to be an Egyptian. He's educated in the ways of the Egyptians, but he was going to lead the people of Israel. You ever felt like God didn't really think ahead with you? You know, because if you could have known what God wanted to do with you, wouldn't you have prepared differently? But I want you to know with God, nothing's wasted. See, not only will God use every wound you carry, but God's going to use every skill you've ever learned, every experience you've ever gone through. It's not wasted with God. I look back, I'm this summer I turned 60 years old. I've been still trying to figure out what I'm gonna do when I grow up. And I've had so many midlife crises, I just keep dividing myself in half. You ever just feel like, if I just known, I didn't know. So my life has just been this meandering, going through all these different things. Who could have guessed? I think it's always funny when people go, it's so fascinating. You were in the fashion industry and in the film industry and you worked as a futurist. I go, that just means I was continuously unemployed, searching for a job that I could do. I've done everything. I've been a carpenter, I've worked construction. I was a librarian. Who could have imagined that? I picked oranges here in Florida. I was a lumberjack. And I flipped burgers and made pizzas. I have had every career in the world because I had no idea what to do with my life. And I think, oh God, couldn't you have just give me a heads up? Because I wouldn't have been like an extreme social introvert with social anxiety disorder if I was going to know I'd be speaking to people. I would have tried a little different route. And so I finished high school with straight D's, first through 12th grade. And that's not exactly accurate. I think I probably got like a B in PE, a couple of C's here and there, and never really got F's because those would require me to go back. But the only reason I graduated from high school, because my English teacher was not going to pass me, is she was going to give me an F on the last day of my senior year of high school, senior day, last day. And I went to the principal and I said, I need an E, a D. I can't graduate with an F. He goes, well, if you didn't earn more than an F, that's what you get. I said, no, you don't understand. I remember telling him this. If you fail me, I'll be back. That's not good for me. That's not good for you. That's not gonna be good for anyone here. I'm convinced they graduated me from high school out of the threat of my return. My brother went off to play college football and I just did jobs. Did nothing, just wasted my life. And I look, oh God, couldn't you have talked to me? You're gonna need to do your homework. You should probably pay attention in school. You shouldn't just wander around doing nothing with your life, moving from occupation to occupation to occupation. And then I begged my way into college, not because I could get in, because I knew I couldn't get in. I walked into the office of the provost of the university, and I needed to meet with this guy, and they wouldn't let me in. And that I was out of my mind. I was a little crazy. And I said, I need to meet with the guy in charge, the president. You're not gonna get to meet the president of the university. I need to meet with the president. And so out of, I don't know, fear, they just let me meet with the guy. And I go to this guy and I said, I need you to let me into your university. He goes, well, there's a process. You need to bring your application, you need to bring your grades. No! If you see my grades and my application. You will never let me in. I remember looking at this guy and saying, I need you to look me in the eyes. I need you to decide to give one human being a chance. I don't know why, but he let me in. And I don't know what to do, so I started studying philosophy. I didn't know there were other people in the world wondering why they existed. And man, it's so funny. People thought, oh, you were studying philosophy because you were an intellectual. No. I was in a desperate search to know why I existed. I wasn't trying to be an intellectual or an academic. I was hoping these people were as desperate to understand why we were here as I was. And so I just found myself devouring everyone from Plato to Socrates to Aristotle to Locke and Hume and Descartes and all the way through and to Descartes. And I didn't know that I was going to be like a follower of Jesus. Why did I waste so much time? You know, and then when I finished everything in philosophy, I thought, okay, let's do psychology, because I didn't know that I wasn't going to need that. And then when I became a Christian, they go, oh, you shouldn't be studying philosophy. I said, it's too late. Like, I read pretty much everything. And they said, you need to burn the books as if you can get them out of your head. So I got rid of all the books because Christians told me that that's the Egyptians. That's the wisdom of the Egyptians. Get that out of your life. I want my books back. Sorry. And my albums. Man, original Beatles and Rolling Stones and that's the devil's music. Get that? That's the Egyptians. And then when I studied psychology, I said, no, psychology, that's the world. You know, Freud and, you know, Adler and Jung and Gestalt therapy, that's the world. You need to study the Bible. Then why do you think God let Moses be educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians? And powerful in speech and action? See, I think somewhere along the way, we thought faith was our absolution from thinking. And we have made our faith a stupid expression of belief in God. I'm just shooting straight. Pastor Rich can fix this later. And I mean, right here, it says pulpit. That's interesting. I don't know why, it just is. Sorry, attention deficit. And because if we don't tell people where everything has to be, we don't know. But here's the thing, is that you should be educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians, because with God, nothing's wasted. Don't let anyone tell you your past was a waste. I look back now, I go, oh man, I was reading all that contraband when I was 10 years old, reading Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, Andre Norton and Ray Bradbury. I was reading all this science fiction and I wasn't paying attention in school. All I did, I just wasted my time expanding my imagination and imagining other universes, other dimensions, other possibilities. How could I have ever thought that God could use that to expand my imagination, my creativity, my faith? Because you see, with God, nothing's wasted. Robert Heinlein didn't know he was mentoring me for ministry. He didn't know that. See, who would have ever known philosophy, the love of wisdom, could actually be helpful later when we're trying to figure out, what do I do with my life? Who could have ever known psychology, which means the study of the soul, would be what I would actually be doing the rest of my life, trying to understand the soul? Now, I know some of you here, you're going, but I don't have any education. Some of you here are like, I never went to high school or college. Man, I know where the education comes from. It comes from the street. I spent 10 years of my life working with drug cartels. 10 years of my life walking in rooms where cocaine stacked the ceilings, Uzi machine guns everywhere. Didn't look like that was your education, but let me tell you, nothing prepared me better for what I was going to do in the future than walking into a place I didn't know I could walk out. Let me tell you, nothing will build your muscle of faith knowing this might be the last time you ever have a conversation with any human being. Stephen didn't know this was his last time. He thought it was his first time. There's some of you here, you've allowed a lie into your soul saying you don't have what it takes. All you got is educated on the street. One time my son Aaron asked me when he was younger, hey, Dad, how come all like the pastors from the suburbs talk and look so like street. And you're like street. And you don't dress and talk like that. I says, because when you come from the street, you don't have to act like from the street. Because you learn something on the street. And let me tell you, Moses learned something on the streets. He was being educated in the most violent, dangerous house in the world, under the most dark and demented human being he would ever know. And God used that darkness to teach him how to follow the light. Oh, but we're running out of time. So then, when Moses was 40 years old, getting closer to my age, we're getting closer, we're only 20 years off. So we got a while, we still have time, Because with God, nothing's wasted. When he saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Now, the verse 25 is really, to me, so insightful. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. Okay, I know, when you read the Bible, you think the good guys always do the right thing. But they don't, because they're not good guys. They're just guys trying to do good. So here Moses has been raised by Pharaoh for 40 years. He comes out to see his own people for the first time. And he sees an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew. Now, do you know that this was happening all the time? Every day, for 40 years. This was happening not only in that moment, but to every Hebrew, by every Egyptian. But Moses acts like this is his moment. So he kills the Egyptian. And we act like, see, there's Moses doing what God wanted to do. No! God did not want him to kill the Egyptian. That's a bad idea, in case you're thinking. Think about this. That was plan A. Kill the Egyptian. Couldn't you try, like, I'm Pharaoh's son? Command the Egyptian. How about let's change the culture? Do not treat Hebrews like this. Let's change the pattern. I mean, there were a lot of options for Moses. He chose option A, kill the Egyptian. Why? Because he was not yet reflective of God's character. He was reflective of Pharaoh's character. See, that's Pharaoh's strategy. If you don't like them, kill them. If you don't agree with what they're doing, kill them. Pharaoh has one strategy, kill them. And I think it's so interesting, it says, Moses thought that they would recognize him as coming from God to rescue them. But how in the world will anyone ever recognize you as coming from God if you do not reflect the character of God? I love how subtle Stephen is, but they did not. They didn't see it. Moses thought they would see it. This is how broken Moses was. We try to act like the people in the Bible were not broken. They're just as broken as we are. I mean, Moses was raised for 40 years under Pharaoh. He was a broken man. He was so broken, the first time he saw a situation he had the power to do something about, he uses his power to destroy. And he didn't even get it. You know what scares me is when I see people doing destructive things and they don't even see that they're doing destructive things. So then it says the next day, as if it was just, the next day after you kill someone, Tuesday. And the next day Moses came upon two Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? That's a great question because they answered actually, well, God, but not yet because he's not ready yet. Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? Isn't it interesting that it was easy for Moses to kill the person he did not want to identify with? But he didn't kill the Hebrew when he was mistreating another Hebrew. You see, as long as we think of us versus them, we will keep room for violence. The moment we all become we, peace comes. And then it says, when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, because that's what every hero does. They run for their life. And here's the phrase, where he settled as a foreigner and had two sons. I think this phrase is really important, where he settled where he settled. See, I want you to know with God, nothing's wasted. Because Moses kills a man, runs for his life, and settles for the next 40 years. And this may be surprising to you, but Moses didn't kill anybody else. It wasn't a pattern in his life. He wasn't a killer, but he did kill someone. See, I find sometimes we try to define people by their worst moment. So someone lies and we call them a liar. Someone steals and we call them a thief. Someone kills and we call them a murderer. Have you ever noticed that we try to define people by their worst moments? And so we think that's what God does. But I want you to know, God is the one person that will never define you by your worst moment. So Moses runs for 40 years. And I want you to know that there's nothing wasted with God. Every time you failed, that just becomes material for God to create a new future. For 40 years, he runs and he settles, and that's the tragedy. See, not that he became a killer. He didn't become a marauder. He didn't pull together a bunch of men and start, just raiding village after village after village after village. Moses just went and settled and lived a life he was not created to live. See, I think the greatest danger in your life is not that you're going to be a criminal. You did not wake up this morning going, do I go to VOUS conference? Or do I rob a bank? I'm not sure, and which one do I do? See, the great danger for you is that you're gonna settle for a life that is less than the one God has for you, because the failures of your past have convinced you that that's your future. But I don't care how many times you failed, you are not a failure. It's just material. Maybe some of you are like, you look at these guys, they're just, and they're so amazing. I mean, DC is so gifted, and Rich is so good looking, and she's so good looking, and he's so gifted. It just, either way, it just flips. It's really crazy. And they write books. They have Chad Veach writes books. You have Robert Madu. I mean, these super talented guys. You ever just feel like, what am I supposed to do? You just feel like that? Like, when I was your age, 34 years old, I didn't even know what to do with my life. I was just moving out to LA, running from Christianity, trying to create a new life. I had no idea what my future looked like. I didn't write a book till I was 40. I remember sitting with my wife at 50 in a pool in Greece and saying, I think I've wasted my whole life. I don't know if I've ever done anything that really mattered in the world. See, every time you failed, you have to be careful to not let it define you. To not let that lie seep into your soul. And I would just look back and go, I just didn't know. I just had so much wasted in my life. And sometimes the waste in my life has overwhelmed me, going, if I could have just gotten it sooner. If I could have just understood sooner how with God nothing's wasted, I think I would have moved further and faster ahead. But that's why I'm going, we may be the old guys, but we're just getting started. Because I have way more failure than you. So I have a lot more material to create a future with. Amen. And I listen, I'm a city guy, so wherever like those cows and sheep, were relieving themselves, it was just like, man, I brought the wrong shoes, man. These shoes, they need to be saved from this obstacle course, and they don't move any of the poop. They're all just there. And Matthew's like, because of nature, nothing's wasted. And I'm going, looks like waste to me. He goes, oh no. He goes, the waste is fertilizer. How many times have I thought my life was just waste? God goes, no. God goes, oh no, all those failures, that's not waste. That's fertilizer. I'm just using it to build a new future and a new you. Oh, but I got to get to this last part. I'm gonna do this so fast. No. I want to respect the time. It says, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. And when he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. He went over to get a closer look, and he heard the Lord say, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob. And Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. And then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground. We're just gonna go right by all that. He says, I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. And I've heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. God said, this is what I'm gonna do. I've heard their cries and I'm coming to set them free. If I'm Moses, I'm going, hey, thanks for letting me know. Thanks for the heads up. Glad to hear it. And then God says, now come. I will send you back to Egypt. See, one of the things I love about God is whenever he's gonna do something epic in history, he refuses to do it alone. I don't understand this about God. Yesterday asking KD, there's a problem with Steph not getting the MVP because the Warriors swept the Cavs in 4 games. And KD says, who cares? Who got the MVP? And we're amazed that Steph doesn't seem to matter to him that KD is stealing his light. Because they're winning championships together. Well, you see, that's amazing. But what I'm amazed with is God says, I'm going to set my people free, but I'm going to do it through you. You're the one who ran. You're the killer. You're the one who made all those mistakes. You're the one who's wasted 40 years on top of 40 years of your life. And God says, I'm not the one who needs this as much as you do. You need to stand in this moment. And this is what Stephen says. This is the same Moses. I love that. Not a different Moses. This is the Moses that was born and sent out after 3 months. This is the Moses that was broken and shattered because he never knew who he was. This is the Moses who was raised by Pharaoh's daughter and didn't know who his people were. This is the Moses, the first time he stepped out, he kills an Egyptian soldier. This is the Moses, the one he's caught. He runs for his life. This is the Moses who settled for less. He wasn't looking for God. He wasn't like, I'm done running, I need God. He was still running. But here's the amazing thing about God. When you run from God, he's waiting for you where you're going. And he says to him, this is the same Moses. They had rejected the words, who made you ruler and judge? He was sent to be the ruler and deliverer by God himself. Through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He led them out of Egypt and performed wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea. And here it is. And for 40 years in the wilderness, this is the same Moses who told the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your own people. What was about to happen in Moses' life? He was going to lead an entire people out and they're going to wander the wilderness for 40 years. And the moment they got free, even when they saw the parting of the Red Sea, they didn't have enough faith to trust God. And the moment they were free, they wanted to go back to captivity. They wanted to go back to Egypt. How are we going to survive this? They were afraid after just 4 days. Imagine if they had known it would be more than 40 days and more than 4 months and more than 4 years. Imagine if they had known we're going to be wandering this wilderness for 40 years. No one knows how to survive 40 years in the wilderness, do they? Oh. Moses, when he was running from God, when he thought all those years were wasted, God was teaching him how to survive the wilderness for 40 years. So when it was time to lead the people out, they were afraid, but he said, I've got this. I've done this, been there, done that. I know what it is to wander for 40 years. I'm going to lead you in and lead you through. Because with God, nothing's wasted. So we think, what a waste that a 33-year-old man who came to bring hope and love and peace to the world, what a waste that this prophet with such wisdom would be crucified at the age of 33. You can look at Jesus on the cross and go, what a waste. But on that third day, you could hear the echo in eternity with me. Nothing's wasted.